Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. I'm really glad you've joined us today for another immersive journey right into the heart of history's most complex and, frankly, captivating topics. Here at the English BookCast, our mission, it isn't just to entertain, it's really to give you a true shortcut to being exceptionally well-informed. We sift through, mountains of information, articles, research, our own notes to bring you those surprising facts and those crucial insights that genuinely stick with you. Today, we're embarking on an epic exploration, one that promises to challenge some long-held assumptions, the origins and early Gothic migrations. Our main guide for this deep dive is a really foundational work in the field, Thomas S. Burns' seminal A History of the Ostrogoths, which came out back in 1984. But rest assured, we won't be stopping there. We'll be weaving in a rich tapestry of insights from a broader range of scholarly works, drawing on decades of archaeological and historical research to give you the most comprehensive and hopefully fascinating picture possible.
And our objective for you, our listener, is, well, it's crystal clear. What we aim to do is navigate the often, let's say, murky layers of myth, the painstaking revelations of archaeological evidence, and the intricate, sometimes conflicting historical accounts. Our goal is to provide you with a clear, detailed, and truly deep understanding of how the Goths, as a distinct people, actually came into being and embarked on their initial crucial movements across the vast expanse of Europe. By the end of this, you'll gain a deeper understanding of their earliest forms of social and political organization, the incredibly fluid nature of their identities, and their first pivotal and often turbulent interactions with the mighty Roman Empire. It's a story not just of conflict, but of remarkable adaptability, strategic choices, and, the profound forging of a people against the backdrop of a changing world.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the beginning then. When we talk about Gothic origins, one name just inevitably surfaces, often sort of shrouded in this mythic grandeur, Jordanes. His 6th century work, the Gitica, it isn't just a historical text, it's truly a foundational narrative. For centuries, this was the story that shaped how people understood where the Goths came from, almost like an ancient epic poem or a national saga that became the definitive account.
Yeah, what's absolutely fascinating here is precisely how Jordanes, who himself was a Romanized and Catholic Goth living in Constantinople in the mid-6th century, how he went about constructing this lasting narrative. He condensed and revised an earlier, much more voluminous work by Casiodorus called the Ostrogothic. Casiodorus' original it was sprawling, almost encyclopedic, 12 books. A history of the Goths. But as political fortunes shifted and the Goths themselves evolved, it sort of lost its immediate relevance. Jordanes, perhaps with a keen eye on ensuring the Goths' place in history, synthesized it into the much more concise Gitica that we have today. He even brought it up to date, incorporating events right up to 550 AD. Think of it like taking an entire library's worth of material and distilling it down into a single, gripping, and, highly influential volume.
So he basically gave us the greatest hits version of Gothic history. Was that like a common thing to do, or was Jordanes particularly good at shaping the narrative this way for a specific reason?
It was probably a bit of both, actually. Condensing earlier works wasn't unheard of, no. But Jordanes' specific genius, you could say, lay in his ability to craft a powerful, unifying identity. The core of his narrative, which, as you said, became the widely accepted origin story for centuries, details this legendary journey from the Isle of Scandia, what we now know as Scandinavia. He tells us their legendary King Beric led the Goths, leaving in just 3 ships, eventually landing on what's now the Pomeranian West Prussian coast in Poland. And this wasn't, a quick dash across the Baltic. He recounts their slow, deliberate migration from there, moving inland and eventually reaching the Ukrainian region after approximately 5 generations.
5 generations. Wow. That's an incredible stretch of time for a single migration to be remembered and retold with that kind of specificity. What sort of details did he include about this journey?
Well, the details are often more symbolic than strictly geographical, But Jordanes didn't just stop at detailing their journey. He quite deliberately constructed a powerful, almost mythical identity for the Goths. He did this by linking them to various ancient and, frankly, venerable Balkan peoples like the Getae, the Dacians, and the Scythians. Peoples Rome knew and sometimes respected. He even integrated the biblical Gog and Magog myth into their lineage, though, interestingly, he kind of stripped it of its original, often negative, meaning as this monstrous, destructive force. This was a very deliberate, quite sophisticated effort. It gave the Goths a history comparable to these established ancient peoples. Essentially, it provided them with a venerable, legitimate identity in the eyes of the wider Roman world, a world obsessed with lineage and tradition.
So not just history, but a tool for legitimization. That's a powerful realization. And you mentioned Cassiodorus' original methodology. How did that influence Jordanes' writing?
Right. It's important to understand that Cassiodorus, the original author Jordanes was summarizing, used ethnographic methods. These were quite similar to those used by the Roman historian Tacitus in his Germania around 100 AD. This approach, known as Interpretatio Romana, was basically a Roman lens through which to describe the barbarian world. It involved explaining foreign lifestyles, concepts, institutions by equating them with familiar Mediterranean things or framing them in Roman terms. Jordanes, in turn, applied these insights. Often he only kept the more or less Latinized foreign names when direct Roman equivalents just couldn't be found. It was about making the alien understandable and often more acceptable to a Roman audience. We should also remember the unique and, well, rather intense circumstances of Jordanes' access to Cassiodorus' huge work. He famously claimed he only had 3 days to consult Cassiodorus' massive 12-book history.
3 days! Wow! I wish I could digest a 12-book history in 3 days. That sounds almost impossible, or at least it must have required extreme selectivity.
Indeed, it speaks to immense pressure, perhaps, and maybe a very clear agenda in his work. This suggests a process of intense synthesis and adaptation, rather than, simple transcription or plagiarism. He was crafting a new, enduring narrative. So you can see how powerful a foundational myth can be for a people's identity, especially one trying to establish legitimacy in a long, venerable lineage in a world dominated by ancient cultures. It's almost like a newly formed nation today, creating a powerful, romanticized narrative about its founders. Not just historical record, but a living story that binds people together and gives them a place in the world. For the Goths, this myth wasn't just about the past. It was their claim to legitimacy and significance in a Roman-dominated present.
That's a brilliant analogy. Yeah, it helps us understand the purpose behind the story. But here's where it gets really interesting for us today. Because modern scholarship, armed with new tools, archaeological discoveries, often paints a very, very different picture than Jordanes' dramatic, almost epic tale of migration from Scandinavia. It's not just tweaking it, it's a fundamental challenge to the very foundation of that origin story.
Indeed. And this raises that important question. How much of this narrative, compelling as it is historical fact? And how much is a skillfully constructed identity? Scholars like Rolf Hochmann, through really meticulous research, have rigorously demonstrated a distinct lack of any compelling archaeological or philological evidence that's linguistic evidence to actually support a Scandinavian origin for the Goths. This isn't just a minor point of contention. It's a significant glaring hole in the traditional story that Jordanes presented.
So the dirt beneath our feet and the way they spoke basically contradict the legend. That's quite a scientific rebuttal.
Absolutely. And even early academic debates reflected this skepticism, long before Hochmann's extensive work. As early as 1890, the German archaeologist Gustav Cassina, who despite, later controversies around his nationalistic interpretations, initially rejected a Scandinavian homeland for the Goths. He actually argued, based on the archaeology of the time, for an East German origin for Scandinavians themselves, suggesting they migrated to Scania, citing Omontelius' work. Cassina provocatively referred to later Wander sagas that, in his view, presented Scandinavia merely as an officina gentium, a factory of peoples, not the original source for the Goths. He theorized that this perception of Scandinavia being densely populated and a source of many southern tribes might have stemmed from the annual festival and market gatherings on the Isle of Scandinavia. These gatherings would have just made the land appear heavily populated to southerners encountering all these diverse groups, leading to a misconception about their ultimate origin.
Interesting. So maybe just a temporary gathering spot misinterpreted as a homeland.
Possibly. And more detailed archaeological comparisons further complicate the picture and shift the focus. Take Oxenstierna's comparative study of the Weichselraum, that's the Vistula River basin, in modern Poland compared with Gotland in Sweden. His research is quite telling. He observed, for instance, that inhumation burials, where the body is interred whole, were common in the Vistula region around the time of Christ's birth. Yet these types of burials were almost entirely absent in Sweden before that same period. This immediately calls into question the idea that the Goths brought this specific burial practice from Scandinavia if their migration happened, as Jordanes described. While some rich bronze jewelry found in the Vistula region could be Scandinavian-derived, other significant elements of the archaeological record simply didn't match up.
So the very way they buried their dead tells a different story. That's powerful evidence. What did Oxenstierna ultimately conclude from these discrepancies then?
Well, Oxenstierna's conclusion was quite nuanced, and I think it subtly conceded the point against a simple Scandinavian origin. He found that only Västergötland and Sweden showed some parallels in ceramics and a distinct lack of weapon graves when compared to the Vistula culture. This led him to tentatively identify Västergötland as a possible Gothic homeland. But by doing so, he implicitly conceded that his initial premise, that clear Vistula precursors must be found in Sweden for a Scandinavian origin to be proven, wasn't fully supported by the archaeological record. It was a concession to the data, even if he still tried to find some connection. We also have demographic nuances to consider thanks to scholars like M. Stenberger. He observed periods of population growth in southern and central Sweden around and after Christ's birth. But as he critically stressed, this demographic shift alone doesn't definitively confirm a mass Gothic exodus. It could easily have many other explanations, agricultural improvements, changes in social structure, natural population increases. And then there's the linguistic evidence. Rosel, for example, suggested that Gothic linguistic double forms, distinct grammatical variations, appeared after they had supposedly left Scandinavia. He also posited that Gothic might have been linguistically isolated from other Germanic dialects before its migration to southern Russia, further challenging a continuous, clear line of development straight from Scandinavia. So if the grand migration from Scandinavia is largely a myth, or at least significantly unsupported, what do the clues tell us about their real early home and how their identity truly formed? What does the ground tell us, rather than the legend?
Precisely. If the mythical Scandinavian homeland fades under such rigorous scrutiny, where did the Goths truly begin to coalesce? What do archaeologists tell us about their earliest distinct cultural footprints, the physical evidence of a people forming and finding their place, distinct from the Roman narrative?
Right, this is where the story truly shifts from myth to observable history. And those observations, particularly the Cherniakhov finds in the Ukrainian region from the early 1900s, showed striking resemblances to what Cassina had earlier termed the Gotho-Gebadan culture back in Poland. This crucial connection points us firmly towards the wheelbark culture as the earliest identifiable, widespread archaeological manifestation of a proto-Gothic presence. This culture developed right in the broad area where later literary sources do begin to place early Gothic groups, putting archaeology and some textual evidence into a kind of harmony.
So the wheelback culture isn't just some random archaeological site. It's potentially a direct link to the Goths we're looking for. What did this culture actually look like? How did it develop?
It unfolded in distinct phases, showing us a vibrant, evolving people. The earlier phase, known as Wheelbark Lubowitz, began to take shape quite precisely in the mid-1st century AD, specifically during what archaeologists call Phase B1b. This was centered in Pomerania and the lands bordering the lower Vistula River. This wasn't just a haphazard collection of settlements, it was a thriving period for the culture, flourishing in these areas for about a century, particularly during the earlier 2nd century, Phase B2. We see evidence of organized agriculture, distinct pottery styles, and burial customs that set them apart. Life in this initial phase would have been primarily agrarian, centered around small, self-sufficient communities. Okay, an agrarian society finding its footing. Exactly. Then, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, we see a significant and widespread expansion during the Wheelbark Sicel phase. Artifacts and customs typical of this phase spread over a much wider area. Initially, this expansion encompassed northern Greater Poland and Mazovia, areas east of the Vistula, roughly between AD 160 and 210. This suggests a growing population, maybe a need for more land or resources. Later, around AD 180 to 230, the same material remained spread even further south, along the Vistula and the rivers San and Bug, extending deep into Byelorussia, Volhynia, and northern Ukraine. This clearly demonstrates a highly dynamic and mobile population, not a static one.
That's quite an expansion. What drove such large-scale movements? Was it just the desire for new lands or something else?
That's a key question, and geography likely plays a big role. It's important to consider the underlying physical landscape. The poor, sandy soil conditions prevalent in the Pomeranian lower Vistula region, their initial heartland, probably contributed significantly to these later resettlements and migrations. Sustaining a growing population in less fertile areas would naturally lead to a search for richer lands. This created a dynamic population landscape where movement was a practical and natural response to environmental pressures, not just a dramatic, singular exodus dictated by some legendary king. It was more organic, maybe necessity-driven.
Makes sense. Move or starve, basically.
Perhaps. And one of the most distinctive features of the wheelbark culture, a crucial indicator for archaeologists, is its unique burial rites. we find biritual cemeteries, meaning they contain both cremation burials, the older, traditional Germanic rite, and inhumation burials, burying the body intact, which was known even before Christ.
So not just one way to say goodbye to their dead, but a mixture. What does that tell us about their beliefs or their society?
It tells us quite a lot, potentially. This biritual practice wasn't necessarily a sign of early Christian influence, as cremations without grave goods are also found and are unlikely to be Christian. Instead, it might reflect diverse non-Christian beliefs about the afterlife, different regional traditions within the broader culture, or maybe even varying levels of wealth and social status among the population. It highlights a complexity in their spiritual world, a tapestry of beliefs rather than a single dogma. It also suggests that the practice of inhumation was already present in the Vistula region, not something imported wholesale from a distant Scandinavian homeland.
Ah, okay, so it undermines the migration theory again.
Exactly. The Polish archaeologist J. Kostrzycki, who researched these cultures extensively, further reinforced this idea that Goths didn't bring inhumation from Scandinavia. His observations were quite insightful from an anthropological perspective. He noted that a large portion of the graves in the lower Vistula couldn't be definitively assigned solely to Goths, and significantly, many were female graves. This suggests a compelling scenario, that Goths, as they expanded, likely took indigenous women as wives in their new homelands. This implies significant cultural give and take. The indigenous cultures might have yielded in some aspects, adopting Gothic practices or language, but they certainly didn't just disappear. Instead, this led to a vibrant, evolving cultural mix where new identities were forged through interaction and intermarriage. So this isn't a simple "they came from here and stayed" pure story. It's a dynamic picture of constant movement, interaction, cultural evolution, shaping the Goths into a distinct yet internally diverse people.
That paints a much richer and more human picture, doesn't it? Of assimilation and interaction rather than just conquest. And these early Goths, they weren't just one monolithic group moving as a single unit, were they? You mentioned they had distinct names and identities hinting at their lifestyles.
Exactly. The idea of a single, undifferentiated Gothic people is far too simplistic. By 291 AD, we see the first recorded mention of a distinct Gothic group. The Western Goths identified as Tervingi. This is fascinating because Tervingi most likely means forest people. It suggests a connection to forested regions, perhaps reflecting their primary mode of existence or their preferred habitat at that time. It then took about another century for the full system of Gothic names to become widely known in Roman sources, revealing this clear dual identity that would persist and become profoundly significant.
So forest people for the West. What about their counterparts in the East? What were they called?
This dual naming system clearly differentiated the two major branches. The Western Goths were known as Tervingi Vesi. Vesi is often interpreted as meaning good or noble. So you have the forest people, who also call themselves the good, noble ones, a self-appellation hinting at internal pride, maybe a sense of superiority. On the other side, the Eastern Goths were identified as Grotungi Ostrogothi. Grotungi translates to steppe and shore dwellers, again indicating a strong connection to their environment, the vast grasslands or coastal regions. Ostrogothi, meanwhile, is often interpreted as meaning shining or sunrise Goths, suggesting a more exalted, perhaps even boastful self-designation, implying a connection to light, maybe a glorious future. It's worth noting there's been this old persistent debate against strictly equating Tervingi with Visigoths and Grotungi with Ostrogoths. Some even tried to etymologize Ostrogoths as baptized Goths, but the shining or Eastern interpretation is generally favored now.
So Tervingi and Grutungi might be more descriptive, while Visigoth and Ostrogoth are more boastful self-names.
That's a prominent view, yeah. Scholars like Herwig Wolfram and Peter Heather argue against a strict, direct equivalence. They see these names more as alternative designations for groups that, while maybe ethnically similar, reflected different internal dynamics and external perceptions. They suggest Tervingi and Grutungi might have been names these groups sometimes gave each other, describing location or lifestyle, while Ostrogoth and Visigoth were perhaps more likely self-chosen, boastful names that arose later. Even if new peoples emerged, there was a lot of continuity in their shared cultural heritage.
That really complicates the simple two distinct tribes idea, suggests a much more fluid, maybe even political naming convention. What truly solidified these distinctions or perhaps blurred them again?
What's crucial here is the devastating impact of the Hunnic invasions in the late 4th century. This caused immense upheaval across the Eurasian steppe and right into Europe, a real cataclysm. This disruption led to a significant reorganization of these Gothic groups. We see evidence that some Tervingi were absorbed into larger Ostrogothic groupings, and similarly some Grutungi became part of Visigothic federations. Crucially, non-Gothic groups, various other Germanic, Sarmatian, or indigenous peoples were also incorporated into these larger, constantly shifting entities. This led Wolfram to famously describe the Goths not as a static, ethnically pure group, but rather as a migrating army or a people on the march, that basically anyone able to fight and contribute could join. This highlights the truly fluid and remarkably adaptive nature of their identity during this tumultuous period. Understanding these nuanced internal divisions and the fluid, almost opportunistic nature of their identity helps us appreciate their sheer adaptability and the immense scale of the challenges they faced as they moved closer and closer to the Roman Empire.
So the Goths are coalescing, expanding across Eastern Europe, developing this dynamic and inclusive cultural identity, becoming a powerful, ever-evolving force. It's only a matter of time before this migrating army encounters the immense might of Rome. What were those initial interactions like? How did Rome perceive this new, formidable barbarian force on its frontiers?
This is where the historical narratives of two great powers really begin to intertwine. And it raises that important question. When did the Goths first truly appear on Rome's direct radar? And how do they fit into the Roman understanding of the barbarian world? For a long time, the Goths were operating beyond Rome's established and fortified limits. Roman imperial policy, particularly under emperors like Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Diocletian, was heavily invested in reorganizing and maintaining its sophisticated system of fortified frontiers, roads, military outposts. Yet we know that Tacitus, writing his Germania in AD 98, didn't even mention the Goths, which is a significant omission. It indicates they were still largely outside the direct purview and ethnographic understanding of Roman chroniclers at that time.
So they were simply off Rome's map, sort of a force developing in the shadows, you could say.
Exactly. But the Roman Empire was by no means a stranger to barbarian incursions, and the stage was certainly being set for future clashes. The Marcomannic Wars, which raged from 161 to 180 AD, served as a significant and bloody precedent. Although these wars didn't directly involve the Goths, they clearly highlighted the immense pressure on Roman frontiers from large coalitions of other Germanic peoples, Burgundians, Lombards, Vandals, Gepids. This period showed Rome's vulnerability to large-scale, coordinated movements from beyond its borders and set a critical context for the future movements that would eventually include the Goths. It was a clear warning sign.
A taste of things to come.
Precisely. The first significant military clashes with the Goths specifically start appearing in the record in the late 3rd century. In 271 AD, Emperor Aurelian, a formidable figure, achieved a notable victory. He decimated Gothic forces, killed their leader Cannibaudus, and pushed them back beyond the Danube. However, this victory came with a significant, a rather telling strategic concession. Rome relinquished the province of Dacia, an important territory. This wasn't necessarily a sign of weakness, perhaps, but more a pragmatic response to persistent Gothic pressure, acknowledging the immense difficulty and cost of holding that exposed territory. A strategic withdrawal, really.
So, a victory, but one that came at a cost, revealing Rome's pragmatic side. Were the Goths purely a land-based threat, or did their ambitions extend beyond that?
Not at all. The Goths were a persistent threat, and their capabilities extended beyond land warfare. We also see Gothic naval attacks on Asia Minor in 275. This demonstrates a surprisingly versatile military capacity, though these raids were ultimately defeated by Emperor Marcus Claudius Tacitus in 276. Half a century later, in 332 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great, ever the strategist, employed a different approach. He decided to settle Sarmatians, another group from the steppe north of the Danube. His intention was to use them as a defensive buffer against continuing Gothic raids, creating a kind of tribal shield for the empire. This tactic was effective, at least short-term, but it came at a heavy cost to the Goths, reportedly over 100,000 losses. It even saw the capture of Ariariscus, a son of a Gothic Rex, an important chieftain, indicating a significant blow to their leadership.
100,000 losses, that's staggering.
It is. But what's fascinating here is that even in these early stages, the relationship wasn't purely one of unrelenting hostility, like the Roman propaganda often depicted. While many Goths certainly raided Roman borders and challenged imperial authority, the sources also indicate that scores of Goths willingly fought for the empire as auxiliaries. This tells us that the lines between barbarian and Roman were incredibly fluid, marked by shifting alliances, complex pragmatic agreements, mutual influence. It was far more nuanced than a simple us versus them narrative. Goths weren't just external enemies, they were also, at times, internal players, mercenaries, even allies within the Roman system.
That really complicates the black and white picture we often get. But the most famous, or perhaps infamous, early clash, the one that profoundly altered Roman history and deeply impacted the Goths, has to be the Battle of Adrianople. This wasn't just another border skirmish, it was a true cataclysm for the empire.
Absolutely. Adrianople is undeniably a watershed moment, a true turning point. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD was the devastating culmination of the Gothic Wars of 376 through 82. These wars didn't just erupt spontaneously. They began as a rebellion by a large group of Goths who'd been settled within Roman territory but were suffering from appalling treatment and corruption by Roman officials. They were joined by other Balkan tribes like the Alans and Thracians, all uniting against Emperor Valens of the Eastern Roman Empire. Tensions had clearly been brewing for some time, even since Emperor Julian's reign. Valens had sent troops to the Danube before, but other issues arose.
So it wasn't just an invasion, but a desperate uprising against Roman mismanagement and abuse, and the outcome was catastrophic, wasn't it?
Yeah. Nothing short of it. The Gothic chieftain Fritigern achieved what can only be described as a decisive victory, famously annihilating two-thirds of the Roman field army. The sheer scale of the defeat sent shockwaves through the entire empire, a blow almost unparalleled in Roman history up to that point. Emperor Valens himself died during the battle. Historical accounts differ on exactly how. Some say fighting bravely, others wounded and burned alive in a hut. But his death was a profound symbol of Roman vulnerability and the unexpected power of their barbarian adversaries, a humiliation on an unimaginable scale.
Wow, losing an emperor on the battlefield.
Exactly. The historical significance of Adrianople cannot be overstated. Many historians view this event as the prelude to the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire. It signified a fundamental, irreversible shift in power dynamics. It wasn't just a loss of territory or troops, it was a profound blow to Rome's perceived invincibility. A deep psychological wound that opened the door for future, larger-scale migrations and fundamentally altered the political landscape. Rome now had to negotiate with, rather than simply dominate, these groups.
A real turning point, psychologically as well as militarily.
Definitely. And we even have archaeological evidence that helps us understand the immediate aftermath and how the Goths, particularly the Ostrogoths, reorganized. Poor Ostrogothic graves found at Botaniani de Lul, Kirimidirai, dated around 380-400 AD, give insights into early Ostrogothic expansion and resettlement. These graves were near indigenous Cherniakhov culture settlements, a major local power, right at the western edge of the steppe where they'd first coalesced. These were Goths who hadn't fled with another group under Odotheus in 386, sparing them a separate bloodbath on the Danube. The distribution of artifacts, especially female jewelry, indicates significant interaction and influence between these Eastern Germans, likely Ostrogoths, and the locals. It suggested even occasional intermarriage occurred, demonstrating that cultural give and take where the Germans gained influence, introduced new styles, but the indigenous culture clearly endured, adapting new ideas even from the looming Hunnic domain. Imagine the shockwaves Adrianople sent through the Roman world. Not just a loss, but a profound blow to their idea of invincibility. It opened the door for everything that came next.
The death of Valens and that catastrophic defeat truly ushered in a new era of Gothic power and ambition. The stage was set for figures like Alaric, whose strategic movements would fundamentally redefine the relationship between Goths and Romans, pushing them from external threats to internal and incredibly dangerous players within the very fabric of the empire.
What's truly fascinating here is how the sheer chaos of the late 4th and early 5th centuries propelled individuals like Alaric into such unprecedented prominence. Alaric I, who led the Goths roughly from 391-395 to 410 AD, wasn't just a chieftain or a simple warrior. He was a sophisticated political and military leader, really adept at navigating a highly complex Roman political landscape. He ruthlessly exploited the internal divisions and rivalries within the Roman court, often playing different factions and powerful generals against each other to his own advantage.
So he wasn't just brute force, he was a strategic thinker, a political animal. How did his early career set the stage for his later actions?
His early career perfectly illustrates this complexity. He initially renewed treaties with powerful Roman generals, most notably Stilicho, in 392. He even fought with Emperor Theodosius at the bloody Battle of Frigidus in 394. Gothic forces, fighting as Roman auxiliaries, suffered incredibly heavy casualties there. Essentially, they were used as cannon fodder by the Romans. Despite this costly service, Alaric was only appointed a comes, a military commander, and, to add insult to injury, placed under the command of Gaius, a man considered of lesser standing. This, combined with devastating Hunnic raids on Gothic lands in 394–395, while their main forces were off fighting for Rome, fostered deep resentment and a burning desire for better terms. The Goths felt used, undervalued, betrayed.
You can see why he'd be looking for payback, or at least better recognition.
Exactly. And Alaric's strength grew dramatically after Stilicho's downfall in 408 AD, a tumultuous event that destabilized the Western Roman Empire. This was immediately followed by a horrific massacre of Roman auxiliaries' families within Roman territory. This act of cruelty by the Romans against their own allies caused an immediate massive defection. Foreign mercenaries, likely survivors from Radagaisus's forces, another barbarian invasion Rome had just dealt with, estimated at 10,000, 12,000 experienced warriors, deserted the Roman army and flocked to Alaric's banner. This boosted his military strength by about 50%, transforming his army almost overnight. Later, an estimated 10,000 slaves, desperate for freedom in the chaos, also joined his ranks, swelling his total forces to maybe 40,000. Considering his initial power base of Turvingi and Grutungi was around 20,000 fighting men, this was a truly massive increase. It transformed his Goths into a formidable multi-ethnic force that went beyond simple tribal loyalties.
That's an astonishing recruitment drive in the midst of chaos. It shows the desperation on all sides, and this augmented power, of course, led to his most famous act, the sacking of Rome itself.
Indeed. This augmented power enabled Alaric's most famous act, the sacking of Rome in 410 AD, an event that reverberated through the ancient world and right into modern memory. His march on the city starkly highlighted Rome's vulnerability, especially its critical dependence on African grain supplies. After complex negotiations, during which the urban prefect Attalus was briefly proclaimed emperor by the Goths as a kind of puppet ruler, Alaric's forces famously entered and plundered the Eternal City for 3 agonizing days in August 410. Unspeakable riches were taken, treasures beyond measure, potentially including parts of the legendary Jewish temple treasures brought to Rome centuries earlier by Titus. And a crucial hostage, Galla Placidia, Emperor Honorius' formidable sister, was captured by Alaric's brother-in-law, Etholf, becoming a key pawn in the high-stakes political games that followed.
Plundering Rome itself, unthinkable for centuries.
Truly. Following the sack, the Goths, burdened with plunder and new recruits, moved south. Their clear strategic goal: reach the grain-rich province of Africa, the granary of the empire. That would provide a secure food supply and a strategic base. However, their ambition was tragically thwarted by the impassable Strait of Messina. Alaric's Goths, despite maybe some earlier naval exploits centuries before, were no longer seafarers, making a naval crossing to Africa impossible without a Roman fleet they didn't have. Alaric died in Bruttium shortly thereafter, under mysterious circumstances, and the legend of his burial with his treasures in the Busento River became a lasting, romantic, tragic part of European memory, a testament to the larger-than-life figure he'd become. The sacking of Rome by a barbarian king was just seismic, an unthinkable blow to Roman pride and power that irrevocably altered Western history and the psychological understanding of the empire. It proved Rome was no longer invincible.
Alaric's death marked a dramatic turning point, maybe a pause in the storm, but it certainly didn't end the Gothic saga. His successor, Athof, carried forward their journey, eventually leading to a more settled, politically integrated existence within the Roman world, a profound shift for a people long defined by movement and plunder.
Absolutely. Atholf's leadership was a truly critical phase. He understood, perhaps more deeply than Alaric, that simply plundering and constant movement wouldn't secure a lasting future or a stable homeland for his people. He led the Goths out of Italy in 412, seeking more attractive, sustainable lands away from the constant Roman military pressure. This strategic journey ultimately brought them to southern Gaul, specifically the rich agricultural regions around Narbonne and Bordeaux, much more promising and sustainable than war-torn Italy or the Balkans.
That's a significant shift, from a conquering army to a people actively seeking a place to settle and thrive. But Athof took this desire for integration even further, didn't he? In a really surprising way.
He certainly did, and in a way that truly challenged Roman perceptions of barbarians. Athof harbored distinctly Romanesque ambitions. This was powerfully symbolized by his extraordinary marriage to Galla Placidia, the formidable and politically savvy sister of Emperor Honorius, in Narbonne in 414. This was no mere hostage exchange, it was a profound political statement. They even had a son, deliberately named Theodosius, a clear imperial name after Galla Placidia's father, Emperor Theodosius the Great. Tragically, the child died in infancy, but his birth briefly positioned him as a potential heir to the childless Western Roman Emperor Honorius, signifying an astonishing attempt to forge a new Roman Gothic identity. a true blending of the two worlds at the very top. The historian Orosius, a contemporary, famously attributes to Athoth the desire not to destroy the Roman Empire, but rather to restore and extend it through Gothic might. A truly remarkable, revolutionary ambition for a barbarian king.
Wow, restore Rome with Gothic power. That's incredible. But didn't this excessively Roman approach risk alienating his own people? Those who might have preferred a more traditional Gothic path.
You've hit on a critical point. Athoth faced significant challenges, precisely because of his perceived excessively Roman policies. These policies indeed alienated some Goths, who perhaps preferred a more traditional, less Romanized path, valuing their distinct cultural identity more than integration. Simultaneously, the powerful Roman general Flavius Constantius, a man with his own ambitions, applied relentless military and economic pressure by cutting off Gothic supply routes. This forced Athoth and his people to move further, eventually into Spain, where he occupied Barcelona. There, in the summer of 415, Athoth was tragically murdered, reportedly by a groom whose former master he had killed, possibly part of a Gothic factional struggle. This led to further internal struggles among rival Gothic factions, during which Galla Placidia was returned to Honorius, but not for free. It was in exchange for vital wheat supplies, highlighting their constant struggle for basic sustenance.
So his vision ended tragically, caught between Roman pressure and Gothic dissent.
Yes, but despite this turmoil, a pragmatic alliance was eventually forged in 418 AD. The Romans, facing multiple other relentless invaders, Vandals, Alans, Sueves in Spain and Gaul, desperately needed help. They enlisted the Goths, now under a new leader, to combat these tribes. After 2 years of tough campaigning, proving their loyalty and military prowess, the Goths finally achieved their long-awaited dream. A settled kingdom within the Roman world, specifically in southwest Gaul with their capital at Toulouse. This wasn't just a military victory. It marked a profound shift from their nomadic, raiding existence to a recognized, legitimate, settled kingdom.
Finally, a home.
Exactly. And this highlights a fundamental aspect of Gothic life that persisted through all their migrations. They were primarily farmers. While large annual Roman payments were undoubtedly welcomed, even demanded, access to productive land was always the essential means of accumulating wealth, ensuring sustenance, and crucially, securing both economic and political independence. The Goths had always been agriculturalists, living in small, decentralized communities. Even the profound disruptions caused by the Huns didn't change this fundamental feature. Land provided them with a stability and autonomy that imperial payments alone could not. It was vital for their long-term survival. This transformation from wandering invaders to established settlers marks a profound evolution in Gothic history, laying the foundational stone for what would become the influential Visigothic kingdom, a story we'll definitely continue to unravel.
What an incredible, truly epic journey we've taken today. We've traced the Goths from the mythical mists of Scandinavia through the grim archaeological realities of the Wilbart culture in Poland and Ukraine, and witnessed their first tumultuous encounters with Rome. We explored the shocking, devastating defeat of the Roman Empire at Adrianople, the dramatic sacking of Rome under the cunning leadership of Alaric, and finally, the establishment of their first settled kingdom in Gaul under leaders like Athoth, who dreamt of a Roman Gothic future. You've heard how their identity wasn't static, not some fixed concept, but was constantly forged and reforged through relentless movement, complex cultural exchange, impressive military prowess, and even deep personal intermarriage with indigenous populations and Roman imperial figures, creating a remarkably adaptable and resilient people.
And this raises an important question for you to ponder, something to mull over long after our deep dive concludes. If the Goths were so adaptable, capable of sophisticated diplomacy, and indeed often eager to integrate into Roman structures, even to the point of a king marrying an imperial princess and giving their son an imperial name, why did the dominant Roman narrative so consistently portray them as the other, the wild barbarians bent solely on destruction? And what does this enduring contrast between historical reality and the prevailing narrative tell us about the power of storytelling, and how historical accounts are shaped by the perspectives and political needs of the victors, or in this case, the besieged, even today?
Our deep dive into the fascinating, complex world of the Goths is far from over. In our next installment, we'll continue to follow their incredible journey, examining the further evolution of their kingdoms, their intricate and often tense relationship with the Eastern Roman Empire, and the rise of other Gothic powers that shaped the future of Europe. So be sure to join us next time as we delve even deeper into this incredible saga, peeling back more layers of history and myth.